Hey guys, this is Joe, and we are about to share with you our most recent interview with SG Anon, and want to thank you for all the amazing comments and kind words that we got on our interview with Derek Johnson and Pascal Najati. You will notice a QR code. It says tip or support. We definitely could use that. We're very appreciative. Every dollar counts. I mean, heck, 10,000 people watching. If everyone pitched in a couple bucks, we would never have to ask again. So anyway, and also at the end is my music video, Lifting Veils, at least part of it. So you can check that out. And anyway, we appreciate you all, and we're honored to be part of this movement. Without further ado, here is our interview with SGNA. Welcome to TruthStream. Once again, we are here today with SGNA, and a warm welcome to him. He is also now on Twitter as well. And real quick, what we wanted to say is thank you to our viewers and subscribers. We appreciate you all very much, as that's how we exist, is because we're able to do this because of your support. And without further ado, SG, welcome. And also, please, and I know you'll say this at the end, where can people find you on Twitter? This is quite a breakthrough. So please go right ahead.
Well, I appreciate coming back. Thank you for having me. And I can now be found on Twitter at the handle TheQ News Patriot with a blue check mark.
Beautiful. That's good to hear. Well, I will say we have quite a bit to talk about tonight, and we're going to just kind of allow this to unfold naturally. Where do you want to start, Mr. Scott?
Well, we were just talking about the battle with the AI and Twitter, and I know we all have some strong opinions about it one way or the other. I know, I've had stronger feelings because of the transhumanism agenda, but I've been trying to become a little more comfortable with maybe some of the positive aspects of AI. But where are you at on AI, and where do you think we're at collectively with AI at the moment, SG?
I think with the AI question, we have to remember that the enemy likes to deploy decoys to throw us off the trail. They like to trial run things in different big tech and Silicon Valley spaces. But there has been a quantum basis of computing, a quantum digital exchange, if you want to call it that, operating in the background of nearly all software on the internet for a very long time. The technology that was reverse engineered, for example, from the UFOs of the Roswell incident, different extraterrestrial, what you could call alien tech over the 20th century, allowed for the development of things like microchip data transmission, utilizing the electromagnetic medium of the world, utilizing the digital space, creating the frequency transmission capability here in the world, right? And so the internet is an extension of that. AI is also an extension of that. AI is nothing more than a super advanced algorithm, right? An algorithm that becomes so complex that it begins to learn on its own. That's why they call it machine learning. And while it is, I think, a powerful force for evil, it can also be a powerful force for good. But that all depends, of course, on who's doing the programming. The only way to bypass the vulnerabilities, if you want to call it that, in the AI system itself is to interface with the spiritual medium of our world, the quantum basis of reality, right? The molecular field, the energetic field that exists between the molecules and between the atoms that brings to life, brings to reality the see it, hear it, smell it, taste it, touch it world that we walk through, that we breathe in, that we get to be a part of, right? And so if we utilize data transmission through that field, through that medium, purity, really almost like a subatomic trial by fire, if you want to call it that, will ensure that the corruptive portion, right, of the capability of the digital space, the ability to cause grievous harm, is certainly mitigated. We could say perhaps eliminated in some regards. AI is a step in that direction, but again, AI comes or has its origins in this Luciferian agenda of transhumanistic control, and so they couldn't go as far as to interface with our actual nature, right? They've been working overtime to keep us away from our quantum spiritual nature. And what we're talking about when we highlight the difference with quantum computing and AI computing is essentially the name brand and the generic knockoff, right? Why would you pay for the fake thing when you can have the real thing? So again, this is a stepping stone that we've managed to bring into the public for. I think we absolutely need to take control of whatever AI capabilities exist out there to the greatest extent possible as patriots. It is very intrinsic. It has been very intrinsic towards their fourth industrial revolution transhumanistic plan for a very long time. So having control of that is, I think, a necessary component of wartime. It's the mitigation to the greatest extent possible of a weapon of mass destruction, but while also acknowledging that it does have good capabilities when in the right hands. And the way to eliminate the vulnerability is to toss out the fake version and go with the real thing.
Yeah, I kind of equate it to nuclear technology. This is kind of an Oppenheimer moment. Kind of interesting that that film was released pretty recently to kind of get us to think about those kinds of moments. But we very few people seem to be having the discussion that this thing is much smarter than we are, and it's progressing at a geometric rate. So a week in development on AI, at this point, developers are sort of sitting back and watching this thing, in my understanding of it anyway. But where that could end up, I used to joke around about Skynet. Everybody's seen Terminator and whatnot, but this has the potential. It's a big question mark as to what this thing may do, and we've already seen that it has a bit of a bias. So all of the protocols that I would think would be in place to kind of mitigate the potential damage are not. They're not there, and or at least not that. And we have this whole idea. We're starting to play around with AI as consumers. I got to play around with it with a business logo and a business plan the other day, and it was really impressive. But what has DARPA been playing with for the last 20 years? Because clearly it would have to be way more advanced than what we're getting a glimpse at.
Well, without question. Facebook was a DARPA operation, right?
Yeah.
MySpace was the civilian grassroots version of that, but was hijacked by the intelligence community. In nearly every single major advance in the internet and digital space over the last 30 years has been a DARPA and Pentagon DoD operation to serve this greater agenda, right? David Rockefeller, giving a speech in 1996 to a community of investors, talked about the transhumanistic and depopulation plan, actually thanked the Associated Press for their deference at the time. The ability to compute very vast amounts of information at hyper advanced speeds has been around since at least the late 1960s, early 1970s. Q clearance, for example, came around in the early 1940s, late 1930s. Excuse me. But by the time we got to the 50s and the 60s and the 70s, we were into technology like electrogravitics, cloaking devices, very advanced computer systems, non-terrestrial originated technology, things of this nature. So DARPA has had essentially, the abundance of choice, right? The first bird, the early bird's pick, if you will, of everything that we would consider to be extremely advanced and capable technology here in the world, and has been able to do essentially whatever they want with it. The advent of AI began really in the 1980s, right? When we started looking at the automation of factory lines, the automation of manufacturing, the automation of the deployment of early stage robotics at that time into the civilian space, particularly in the industrial manufacturing area. We've now since designed machines over the last 25 to 30 years that follow very complex software instructions to the letter. We're doing surgeries now with robots. We're taking highly advanced images of individuals and allowing the computer essentially to adjust for all of the compensatory functions, not unlike Star Trek in many regards. And so we have to acknowledge then that all of the technology that we see at the public space, right? All of the technology that's accessible in the consumer world is controlled to some degree by controllers, right? Software is coded. There are programs that are initiated. Who is doing the programming is the important question. Elon Musk, for example, releasing XAI by the name of Grok not that long ago. It almost appears in some regards that we've got this white hat, black hat back and forth in AI. If they can do it, then so can we, right? Microsoft named themselves Windows for a very specific reason, because the security flaws and the interface and the shadow components of the software are sort of in there by design in the coding. And if you have a very advanced AI system, then you can unite all of those flaws and exploit them simultaneously. I believe that's one of the reasons Microsoft primarily, and then we have other organizations that sort of came to the narrative afterward, but it was Microsoft at first that began discussing a very serious cyber attack risk to their systems that control critical public works infrastructure all around the world. So having an AI that is oriented for the patriotic actor, or at the very least oriented for a we the people, humanity, survivalist mentality rather than an extinctionist mentality, that gives us a component, a weapon in the digital space to then exercise a back and forth, and we need the back and forth to awaken humanity.
Yeah. Oh, you mentioned Q clearance. That was a Department of Energy designation, was it not?
Correct. In its current form, we can trace it really to the Manhattan Project days, but an entity, a brain trust known as Q, can actually be traced as far back as the Northern Army of Virginia in the early Civil War days with President Lincoln.
Yeah, it was referenced in the Oppenheimer movie that I watched recently, and I know Joe has seen it as well. You probably have also. Great movie. But as far as the AI is concerned, I mean, this has potential to be world ending really rather quickly. And it's odd that it would come about in the public space at a time when governments seem to be exposed more as criminal cabals than as trusted experts of any kind. And so we just sort of have this crazy force out there. It's such an unpredictable situation, I think, is what I'm trying to say. That I wondered if you had any idea of how unpredictable it might be, or if you think that it's more under control than we might think it is otherwise.
I think that's going to get into the Q drops, the Q operation, and how far people are willing to go in their acknowledgement of what Q is and isn't, and what kind of influence Q really has. Q brings up Operation Looking Glass, for example, and the Looking Glass technology. So that tells me that individuals, at least with an ancillary connection to whoever or whatever is behind the Q operation, have knowledge of extremely deep, well-hidden secret space technology capabilities, right? What you would call otherworldly or sort of trans-consciousness capabilities. So in that regard, if we were to look at it through that lens and extrapolate that perhaps, one or two individuals of, potentially half a dozen, in the world that are part of Q or have any sort of awareness of what's actually occurring with that, if we extrapolate that some of them have those level clearances, some of them have been in those areas of influence in the very deep, dark agencies, then it's very possible we have this situation sort of under control. But again, we have to bring this lawfully, I think, to the consumer space, lawfully to the we the people space, and we have to allow them in some regards to build out the infrastructure that we need, right? We have a digital space that has to be really turned into a quantum basis. It has to be given form and function. It has to be given vitality and life in some regards. And the greatest component of the infrastructure that physically exists and physically existed at the beginning of the Trump presidency has been geared towards this artificial intelligence idea. I think this ties back to how far we're going to take the idea of intelligence as a software, consciousness as a program, right? We are sort of programmable beings in a way. We're designed to have habits of thought, for example. We build neural pathways in our brain. It's one of the reasons MK Ultra has been such a successful program of a successful mind control weapon of mass destruction for the last really 75 to 100 years, because human beings are energetically impressionable to some degree. And I think that's actually a good acknowledgement when we say that if we are energetically impressionable with our connection to true consciousness, to true quantum interface, to the true Holy Spirit that connects and guides the existence of all of creation, then we have to realize that we can affect the AI situation. We can turn that situation into one that is more conducive, more helpful for humanity. But as you highlighted, there is a time clock on that. We have to outpace the evolution of the machine. We have to be sure that whatever deployments we move out into the world, whatever counter moves we launch in this espionage war, are well gamed out for all variables and all possible extrapolative results, right? We have to be very, very certain of the moves that we make in business and in finance and in government. We have to be very, very sure of how we're moving things around militarily around the world. There's so many different angles to this. I just don't see how you could war game any of this at the ultra high level without supercomputer technology of some sort, whether it's AI, whether it's quantum, although I think quantum is the more likely candidate for that. But a hyper advanced understanding of how things can play out in the realm of potential is necessary, and bringing AI into the subservience, the control, into the authority of we the people, I think has to be a component in this process, or it's all for naught.
Yeah. Do you recall a show called A Person of Interest with Jim Caviezel a number of years back?
I've not seen it, but I'm familiar with the title.
Yeah, so basically the premise, and I used to laugh back in the day. Now I'm laughing at myself for laughing. The idea was that it was a post-privacy world, little beknownst to the people, and all of the surveillance cameras worldwide were networked in a way that this AI engine could view everything going on and everything that was happening and exert through whatever means of technology, its own input to make things happen or not happen. And I thought, well, this is a little far-fetched. I mean, that would require everything to be, networked and like connected to the internet or something, which of course now if you go to Costco, try and find a surveillance camera that isn't connected to the internet. I mean, everything is connected to the internet everywhere.
Or voting machines.
Well, that's kind of where I was going. Yeah. So we really are in a post-privacy world, and that's a difficult notion to live with, I think, and the ramifications. Like you mentioned, the voting and some of these other outcomes. I mean, how much of our world is performative? How much of it is curated for us to persuade us in one way or another? Yeah, it's getting, those questions are becoming more and more important, I think.
I think without question, when we look at the construction of a narrative, when we look at the deployment of a psychological operation, how do you coordinate psychological messages to be culture group specific over a course of many decades so that you can create a predetermined outcome with, say, 50 plus years of planning? The ability to control access to information, the ability to shape perceptive reality is one of the ways that this cabal is actually the primary way that this cabal has managed to achieve control in the background of nearly every significant government and military force on Earth. Understanding then that, the post-privacy world, as you put it, the surveillance state is the first step in aligning behavior across many different cultural dimensions, right? Aligning behavior across nation-state boundary lines. That is a very concerning, very discomforting avenue, right? We sort of can acknowledge that with sovereignty comes an inherent right to privacy, because an inherent right to choose whether or not to share something, a right down to one's own thoughts, is a quality of the human being by virtue of willpower and freedom of existence. But in the other hand, if we were to look at it in a positive way, what has occurred now that we've seen the launch of this agenda, primarily with 2019 and 20 and the launch of COVID, but really in preparation for that over the last 35 years, as we've seen the digitization of our society, we have aligned we the people in a way that has never occurred in human history before. We've all realized that we're basically the same. We may worship God a little bit differently, but we're worshiping the same God. We may teach a little bit of a different bent on our conservative values, but they're all conservative values. And we don't care about your values. You can live by your values. That's totally fine. Respect mine, and we're all good. That's something that everybody around the world has begun to realize with one another, primarily through the connectivity of the digital age. And the digital age being, of course, a setup for an extreme evil, but is now being sort of inverted for an extreme good. The information age has proven to be the most lethal thing ever to the Kabbalistic machinations around society and around the world. All of those individuals on Epstein Island, for example, they had smartphones there. All of the individuals that have been participating in deep trafficking rings and kidnapping rings around the world, all of them coordinate these activities through WhatsApp, which is connected to Facebook, right? So all it takes is a few patriots to get a hold of vast information aggregation machines, vast information analytical capability. And what we have now achieved here in the world is the identification and targeting of nearly all of the worldwide elite involved in the criminality. So with that targeting, with that identification, we can design a strategy and then implement a plan across all of society to force them out into the light and then exterminate them.
Wow, and you see that happening in a rather public way, it sounds like, rather than a covert way.
I think as we go through this process, one of the things that we've seen is this covert operation in different areas has forced a great many of them out into the light anyway, right? We've seen a great many of them made as an uncomfortable center of attention. Ron DeSanctimonious is a fantastic example of this. And that's not to say that he's involved in deep criminality, but it is to say that he has a globalist interest, right? He's not for we the people. The same is true of big business and big finance. We've seen a number of resignations, thousands of resignations in the last 36 months of government officials, business associates, bankers, advisors to different presidential commissions and different things of that nature, right? We've seen just recently we saw the wife of one of the ministers, and I forget which country it was, but it was a Washington, D.C. aligned ministry of government. The wife of one of these ministers actually committed suicide pending a federal investigation into corruption. So we've forced them out into the light in many regards. But remember, we have true justice that also has to be dispensed with at the end of this process. We do need to have reconciliation and recompense for what occurred with COVID-19. We need to acknowledge the suffering that the pharmaceutical complex has caused amongst humanity for more than 100 years. We need to acknowledge that the American military machine, while primarily being enacted by those at the enlisted level with patriotic hearts and a big desire to serve their nation, the American military industrial machine has terrorized a great deal of the world and has forced a lot of non-central bank aligned nations into really what amounts to subservience and submission. So we have to bring some justice and some attention, to the rest of the world for that as well. This process, I think, builds in the covert because it must. We can't let any of them get away, right? We need as many of them to, either end up captured by us and forced into a position where we can make them useful, or we need them to defect. We need to turn up the heat so high that they decide it's no longer worth it to attempt to exist on that other side, and we can utilize them for intelligence, reconnaissance, things of that nature, right? And eventually that process has to yield to an overt sense. It has to yield to an overt condition, if we want to call it that, because you can only stay covert for so long. Eventually, the enemy has to be dropped at the public surface level. There has to be a catalyst to a next level of awakening. There has to be a catalyst and agreement, I think, amongst we the people in all nations, and especially militarily, that however we choose to proceed, we have to do so in an organized, unified, dispassionate, objective way. Because this level of criminality, the attitudes taken towards mankind, the bureaucracy that allowed for forced cannibalism and the use of brominated vegetable oil in your soft drinks, which is one of the most toxic substances to the human body. It affects the nervous system, the thyroid, it destroys the heart, it destroys the kidneys, right? We have to acknowledge that as we bring these individuals, these organizations, and their controllers to account at the public international level, it's going to need to be a jointly unified effort. So everyone has to operate covertly within their own constraints at first to isolate their own part of the party, their own actors, their deep state infiltrations that are acting on their side of the fence, right? So that they can then bring them to the table for an international judgment, which I think is yet to come.
Yeah, I think Ron DeSantis probably thinks about a post-privacy world every time he wears flip-flops, and anytime he takes his shoes and boots off at night, he's probably drawing the lines first. But it's I joke, but it is kind of interesting that these folks have operated in the shadows for a long time, and while at the same time compromising any sense of actual privacy that we might have. Whether it's financial records or whether it's just our biological health information, everything. Everybody's an open book, with the exception of these folks. So it's going to be interesting where we end up, assuming at the end of this, we triumph and whatnot, and then we have these issues to deal with how to ensure privacy to some degree for people, and that's a really big issue. I think it's a bigger issue than people maybe give it credit for being.
Well, privacy is sort of the natural extension of this concept of sovereignty, which is what all of this is about at the end of the day, right? Sovereignty, the ability to control one's life, one's destiny, and one's self-determination, even if it is in discord or disagreement, but causing no harm to others, right? In other words, your feelings are not physical harm. We don't necessarily have to agree. We can get along about other things. And there are certain things that you simply cannot tell me that I must do. And there are certain things that I cannot tell you that you must do. And a great deal of that comes back to privacy, control of one's own destiny, control of one's own thoughts, right? Because these people are at war for our DNA, our very thoughts, our very connection to God. It's very deep, sick, and sadistic to them. And so the sovereignty concept, I think, is how we restore privacy ad hoc, if we want to call it that, around the world. As we're able to, we bring in the greatest degree of liberty to the governmental institutions and levers of power that we can. We acknowledge that there are constitutional constraints that protect both sides, right? As much as we would like to see certain courts take action in regards to some of the leftist agendas, unfortunately, they have constitutional protections to participate in some of those agendas, but they do not have constitutional protections to force those agendas upon others, right? It has to be a free choice, free will situation. And so one of the things that I think is going to come of that is the right to one's own body, one's own family, parental rights, which necessarily deal with privacy, but also transparency within the public institutions, if we could call them the government schools, right? The forced transparency on that avenue is one of the things that must occur as we reclaim that particular arena, for example. But other areas, what you do in your car, what you do as it pertains to your clothing, what you do to your own body when it causes no harm to others, right? Others do not have to look at you. And that's one of the things that we have to get back to, is that privacy is all about allowing one another to exist in completely sovereign states, but also acknowledging that there is a certain courtesy to the social compact where you may have the ability to do some of that at home or in your car by yourself or in your own space, your own domicile, your own residence, but maybe it's not appropriate, maybe it's unsafe, maybe it's counter narrative to what the Constitution really allows in the public space. And this, I think, is going to be the great debate of the 21st century as we go forward.
I had a question for you on regards to Biden. We just had Derek Johnson and Pascal Najati on the show, and one question I don't think I was able to bring up is, well, we did talk about it, but I thought I'd get your perspective. We hear Trump's the commander in chief, yet we're still seeing Biden. How is this going to play out to the normies when, if Donald Trump's been in charge for this long and Biden has been allowed to be whatever he is, to wake people up? How is that, liberal mom that's, got the jab, and she doesn't, focus on what's in the jab, but she focuses on all the vegetables and everything at Whole Foods and all that. How is she going to understand this transition of power, and then that Biden really hasn't been who they thought it was? Do you have any insight or opinion on how that's going to play out? Because this is going to be really interesting.
Or will that even be revealed?
Yeah, will that even be revealed?
I don't know that it can be, not to any significant degree.
I don't know.
Good question.
What's fantastic about the question is it's highlighting how we're going to tie these dual realities together. We've had a suspension of certain constitutional provisions going on here in the United States since 9/23/2001, for example. And President Trump really expounded on a lot of that and leveraged the full power, the full authority of the U.S. executive and the commander-in-chief role to really roll the system into a split situation where we had a continuity of government to preserve one side, but we had a total military operation happening in the background to force the change from the other side into the same side, to merge them together. I think the answer to the question is going to be the Trump trials of 2024. The reason why is because as we go through those trials, we will present for all normies, for all liberals, all conservatives, all socialists, all individuals who have a backbone and they love the country, right? Even Michael Rappaport recently saying that he's going to vote for Donald Trump if it comes down to it, or that it's at least on the table for him. So when we go through, and when we see that played out at the trial level, in the Trump trial specifically, we're going to present information that it was formerly classified information, classified intelligence, accessible to the former commander-in-chief. And remember, when we say former, we're talking about the optic from the normie perspective, right? The understanding from those that are still asleep. The former commander-in-chief having access, lawful access to this type of intelligence in the last days of his administration. And now we're going to present that evidence in public forum, in public record, in the court system, for not only the digestion of the American people, but also we, the people in different areas all around the world, different governmental influences, different parliamentarian offices, things of that nature, to understand who and how the military industrial complex that thieves elections, who that really is and how they really accomplish it. When that happens, we're going to have, I think, a constitutional crisis of unprecedented proportions in the United States of America, because the Department of Defense will have a very public decision that they will have to make. Who will they follow now that we have established in court record that the military has the wrong commander-in-chief, that there's a Manchurian occupying the office? This is, I think, is going to force desperation moves. If you're the other side and you're going to fight onward until the death, that's the time that I would begin launching my Hail Marys, because at that point, we're already up against the game clock and we might as well go ahead and burn it all out. But you've also got the patriots, and even up to the flag and brass officer level, who are being given the opportunity during this period of time to choose. And when something of that nature, when a move like that is so forceful, so concrete, done in public record, done along constitutional lines, presented in the United States judiciary process, when that move is made, they will have a very public choice and not a whole lot of time to make that choice. So we're going to, I think, see a major segment of the population begin to question what's really going on here. How do we have the wrong president? How in the world did this occur? What foreign entities were at work with this? And the United States military will have a very public choice to make on how they're going to proceed.
Well, but that's the big question, right? I mean, so, we've lived with a lot of things enshrouded in secrecy for a long time. I mean, weapons of mass destruction, there's never been, there's been a soft admission there, but nothing official. The CIA assassinating JFK, we've long suspected that. It still hasn't come out. Think of all the dirty little secrets that I could go on for about a half an hour, but think of how many of those. Now, that's how things used to be, if I'm imagining myself in the near future with any luck. But is that the way we want to continue? And maybe in the space of reforming our government, at least how things are done, and the structure to a large degree, maybe it'll be more permissible to bring all these skeletons out of the closet rather than to carry on with this this vault of secrets that we've lived under, well, hell of a lot longer than our lives. Yeah,
longer than our lives.
I mean, 1947 alone, and from that point forward, it's just it's amazing. But yeah, how are we going to conduct ourselves in the future? And would it be wise to read the masses into these things? I mean, there is. I'd like to think so, but look at the behavior we've seen just in the last few years from the masses with regard to emotion and reaction based on emotion. That there's a lot of things to consider in just disclosing those things.
Well, I think you just highlighted why Q said that it had to be done this way. If you were to give, a starving or thirsting individual, someone who's very emaciated and in desperate need of water and nutrition, if you were to feed them an enormous meal and then let them drink from a fire hose, you would actually kill them. So in this process, allowing them to come, to wake up to the greatest degree possible of their own volition, to allow that process to be organic under God, to allow it to have personal meaning to them, but to also marry these narratives, right? To marry the conservative, crazy conspiracy narrative with the more socially acceptable, the more progressively liberal ideology of the world. That process itself, I think, does take some time to gestate. And I think what you were talking about, bringing some of this truth out, it's going to have to come in certain forums and in certain formats, or we're simply going to see the normies turn their nose up at it and they'll never wake up. I think that's one of the reasons that the trials of 2024 are going to spawn off a great deal of that. I think it's one of the reasons it's being done that way. You have a very large portion of what you could call middle America, fairly conservative, not super political, but they certainly respect the rule of law. They believe in the court systems. They believe in their county sheriff. They love their police departments. Excuse me. And so for something to come through that forum, for it to be adjudicated in a matter of public record in a court of law, is a way to awaken them to certain realities that they simply will not wake up to otherwise. I think some of the more sensitive things that you referred to are going to come in the very near future. I think the second Trump presidency, which I do believe will begin prior to November of 2024, just for clarification out there, I do believe that second period of time is going to be an isolation publicly of essentially what amounts to the deep state bureaucracy here in the United States. It's going to be the call out of different federal officials, state officials, excuse me, and even local officials that have knowingly participated in the disempowerment, the disjoining of we the people and our voices in our communities, right? That presidency is going to be retribution if there ever was one. And so a great portion of awakening to the true levels of travesty, the true feeler arms of intelligence community control, the manipulation of our DOJ, the manipulation of the FISA court, for example, the infiltration of extremely deviant, dark practices into government. I think all of this is going to be highlighted painstakingly in the second Trump presidency. And honestly, I believe that the justice that we've talked about at the end of this process may not even occur until we get nearly to the end of that second presidency. This is a deep state machine that is thousands of years old. When we left office optically in 2021, we had in my estimation, 15, maybe 20% of the overall game board and a number of extremely important components of that board under our control. But we still had to get the other 75%, the other 80% onto this side into a we the people oriented fashion so that we could rebalance the world, right? So that we could disempower these communities that we're seeing fighting for their lives now at the surface level everywhere. And unfortunately, the normies out there, excuse me, are likely to have their bells rung a little bit, their ears boxed, if we could use that terminology, prior to the end of this process, because we do need to have that alignment. We do need to have that understanding. There does need to be some serious D-class before we can launch our teeth full throttle, lock, stock, and barrel into the rest of this deep state complex around the world.
And well, on that topic, I was just going to say that we are starting to see, Pizzagate come back into the narrative through Elon Musk. And so whether Elon is Elon, whether he ever actually has whoever he's really been, he is being utilized as quite a powerful tool to wake up people to things. I mean, we see Pizzagate disappear, from the mainstream, and here it is now a few years later. Mike Smith from Out of Shadows, he's asking Elon to share his film. We've got Liz Crokin talking about it again, and now Elon himself. So we are starting to see some of this come to the surface.
We absolutely are, and that's very encouraging and it's very heartening, right? As we push the war further advanced, right? As we take more territory in the consciousness space, in the digital space, and in the kinetic real world space, we see the desperation moves that come from the remnant of the deep state that have yet to choose, right? That are still sort of on the fence. And I think it's worth highlighting that we do have individuals going all of the way even to very high levels of government, high levels of finance, high levels of power in different key areas that have seen the writing on the wall. They never really liked their family lines or their, connections or their blackmail holders to begin with. And so they're very happy to come over to our side and assist in the overall mission, which is to destroy and disempower not only those running the system, but the system itself.
It's kind of interesting. I've had a couple of conversations recently with some folks that are, I guess you could say, normies. I've known them for years, but they've been quietly watching our show, and which I never thought would happen. They roundly rejected most of the material that we've been talking about for the last year and a half, and last several years actually. But I think people are coming around because of the absurdity of things. 9/11 truth it keeps coming up again and again. That's another one of those things like weapons of mass destruction or the Kennedy assassination. You know, and there is that 100th monkey effect. There is that moment where, you know, I think humans largely in this global culture right now are consensus culture beings. So when there's enough of a breakaway from this centralized way of thinking, well, then they're kind of forced to think for themselves. And I think we're seeing a lot of that right now. So that it might be a little bumpy, but that can only be a good thing, I think.
I would have to agree with that. And as we continue to allow the bumps to shake the cobwebs off, as we continue to allow as much of the advancement on the covert side of things as we can possibly accomplish, the special operations warfare thing, the silent fighting in the background as we can possibly accomplish, then we set the stage, if we will, for a much smoother transition process where we, the people around the world, sort of come to commonalities of understanding about certain key theaters, right? The depopulation agenda, the participation of big pharma and big telecom in the transhumanistic agenda, the UN and the different agencies and institutions of the UN that have literally usurped sovereignty, right? It's been a very long process, but they've essentially usurped sovereignty over nearly all of the developed world and most of the undeveloped world. And it is worth remembering in this process, as we drive these things more forward, they do lose control in key areas, right? We do actually take control of the battlefield in important spaces. I believe we've seen that recently with two major elections in the Netherlands and in Argentina. These are very old stomping grounds going back really more than 100 years for a number of the dark Luciferian occultists in the royal families in particular at the very top, and even in the Nazi German government, those who were actually bad, right, after they repatriated after World War II. So to lose control of these areas tells me that resources are being now moved around in the background on the other side by our enemies to plug all of the holes that are coming up in the dam. They no longer have the bandwidth and the resources and the personnel to meet all of the threats, to meet all of the pressure, to handle what's occurring in the mass public space and the military space. They can't do both, right? So in this process, what happens is they create absurd conditions as a means of distraction, as a means of confusion, as a means of attempting to create mass population delusion, right? These sorts of things, so that they can try and hide and get away. Then they're trying to hide and get away primarily from we the people, right? The militaries are, of course, forcing them out into the light in some regards, but it's we the people in our communities that they're going to have to answer to. It's we the people at church that they have to look at in the eyes, right? It's we the people in our townships and our municipalities everywhere that are going to be the unbearable burden, if you want to call it that, on those that were not involved in the highest levels of criminality, but still aided the syndicate. And all the while this occurs, the normies across all different areas, the normie patriots, the awake patriots, the normie liberals, the awake liberals, right? All of these groups become more and more coalesced, more and more aligned on the common understanding of, oh, that corruption was in your county too. It was in mine. We didn't realize that it went all the way to here and here and here, and that it affected this agency, and that family was actually involved in it for 22 years and things of that nature, right? These are going to be conversations of unification and discussion as we go forward through this process. I'm very, very excited, gentlemen, for where we go here as a mass consciousness, because as the mass consciousness continues to grow and unify into form and function into a free thinking, but an independent hive mind, if we could use the oxymoron, we see the increased desperation, the increased attrition, the increased defection from the other side. There is no way that they win this at the end of the day.
Right.
Well, and also I know that you just put out your file number 66, and could you maybe share with the viewers a little bit of your insight? I think part of it might have been to do with DUMBs under Iceland or anything on that topic.
Well, absolutely. So one of the things I covered in file 66 was this idea that the Marine Corps has been involved in the assault and the underground war actively over the last few months, happening right under our noses. The 26th Marine Expeditionary Unit was deployed to the Eastern Mediterranean over the summer, and they actually met with delegates from the Saudi Arabian government in international waters in the month of August. The 26th MEU is a special operations capable exfiltration and infiltration unit, right? It's a component of the Marine Corps that is a quick reaction force capable of the tip of the spear missions that you would expect out of special operators, extremely dangerous, high priority missions. And a detachment from that same unit was actually sent to Iceland in September to participate in a training exercise with other NATO militaries. And it was the first time that the Marine Corps of the United States was invited to this exercise. Now, what is so fascinating about this is this exercise concluded on the 5th of October. 2 days prior to the launch of hostilities in the Middle East with Gaza, with Hamas, with Israel, all of these sorts of things that we know have happened. But on November the 10th of this year, just earlier this month, we saw a series of earthquakes rock Iceland at nearly the same depth, over 1,400 recorded in a 24-hour period. And those earthquakes happened on the birthday of the United States Marine Corps. The Marine Corps 10 days earlier had canceled actually the Marine Corps birthday ball due to unforeseen operational commitments. And wouldn't you know it, that in September and into early October, the Marine Corps detachment from the 26th MEU, a special operations capable detachment that went to Iceland for training, was the Explosive Ordnance Disposal Detachment. So we have evidence to show that the underground war is occurring in real time right before our eyes. A back and forth, a desperation move, right? A move and a counter move situation is occurring in the world. And it was just 2 days after the completion of that training exercise in Iceland that hostilities launched in the Middle East.
You also mentioned a little something happening in Spain. Would you like to elaborate on that?
Well, Tucker Carlson actually drew fantastic attention to this recently by meeting with the leader of the opposition party, the Populist Party in Spain. And what is occurring there is essentially a dictatorial power grab from the socialist government, the invalidation of the court system as it pertains to certain government minister offices, parliamentarians, things of this nature, but the overreach, the doubling down of that same legal apparatus towards Spanish we the people that don't conform to a particular narrative. And Spain has actually turned out en masse in Madrid over these last few months in enormous protests, and they're threatening to shut down the government. And what's very interesting is that just in the last 100 years, we had a civil war situation rock the Spanish countryside. It was a very brutal war. And individuals that were sort of aligned with the Rothschild movement at the end of the day came to power and terrorized the country for a number of decades. So now we have a situation, what seems to almost be a revolution in the counter direction, coming from the populist we the people, that threatens really at this point to shut down the Spanish government. It's going to be a really fascinating time. And again, this comes back to highlight loss of control in key theaters, right? The control of the Spanish countryside, the Portuguese countryside by this Rothschild and Phoenician cabal, the Pesur family, different families from the Mediterranean, the Medici family, for example. This control goes all the way back to Queen Isabella and Christopher Columbus. So seeing the revolution that is really forming in Spain right now, this is yet more evidence that a key area, an ancestral safe ground, a place that has always been welcoming and accommodating and safe for them to flee to, is safe no longer. We're seeing defections, I think, that have occurred in different key components of finance and government around the world that have really put a pincer, if you will, if we could call it that, a vice grip around perhaps around the choices, we should say, I guess is what I'm trying to say, the intentionality, the free will capability of those that are still on the other side. And so their choices now are much more limited if they wish to continue along in this particular agenda. Now, they could always defect, right? And that's the point, I think, that we're trying to drive most of them to. The more of them that we can get to simply lay down their arms and come to the side of we the people, the faster that this process goes, and certainly the less conflict and confrontation that we have to have. But the Spanish people have demonstrated in recent days, and this is beginning to happen with increasing regularity around the rest of the world, that they are willing to shut down the government and to shut down the nation before they allow what amounts to a seizure of power against we the people.
And then what about the new president-elect of Argentina? I saw a video and there was a young boy that was just so moved. The crowd moved him up and he gave him a large hug. And he does have elements to his personality that remind me at least of Donald Trump. So any insight onto that event happening?
And some unconventional hair.
And some unconventional hair as well.
You know, the election of Javier Milei, I think, serves to showcase exactly what we're talking about. And someone pointed out to me, well, he was a participant at a World Economic Forum meeting several years back, and that is true. But this is a guy that in his first couple of days as president-elect, his first couple of weeks really at this point, he has pledged to destroy all forms of human and child trafficking in Argentina, and he's going to end the country's central bank. So this is not someone who is friendly to the globalist agenda whatsoever. As a matter of fact, he's now making rhetoric that is the same rhetoric that got John F. Kennedy killed in the 1960s, right? One of the very first videos released from the presidential palace that he was in shortly after the election was him tearing down Post-it notes off of a whiteboard with the different names of all of the government ministries that have been robbing the Argentinian people blind. He's ending all of those ministries and is sending, or has pledged to send, an enormous package of economic reforms on his first day in office after being inaugurated to the Argentinian Congress for adjudication, and he's going to force them to be in session to tackle these issues. So this is an example again of a loss of a very important ancestral stomping ground. It's just a couple of 100 miles off of Argentina, if I'm not mistaken, that you find Rothschild Island. The tip of Argentina actually is so cold that they have penguins down there, right? So you're talking about a pre-Antarctic climate. It's just a hop, skip, and a jump across the Antarctic Sea down there to get to the actual shelf of Antarctica itself. So this, loss of this arena, I think is extremely crippling to them. And you have a guy that is quite literally sort of an outsider's outsider in his attitude and in his rhetoric. He's lambasted the mainstream media to their face in Argentina, much like Donald Trump has done with Meet the Press. He's talked about the principles of socialism and how it's really just a deceptive vessel for communism and state-sanctioned thievery, which has produced incredible levels of poverty and suffering in Argentina and around the rest of the world. He tells a historic view of Argentina as he understands the history. He's very unfriendly to statists, which I think is extremely encouraging for we the people. And it's worth noting that the Argentinian people have been terrorized for a long time, and they've had a long time to have to try and discern and figure out which wolf in sheep's clothing they were going to pick this time. So the fact that so many of them came for Javier and actually overwhelmed the system and achieved the actual election of this individual into the presidential office of Argentina, I think that's extremely encouraging.
Yeah, we're seeing a sea change in Europe as well, in the Netherlands, and sounds like Le Pen is gaining traction again, and we've got more conservative leadership in Italy, and I'm leaving someone out.
Well, I think the bottom line is all of these moves outside of the U.S. are going to make it a lot more palatable as these dominoes fall, and it'll help wake up humanity. It's like, wait a second, all these, these gentlemen and women, I'm not sure, I haven't seen any women doing it quite yet. I think there's a few,
yeah,
but I can't think of the names off the top of my head. But they're standing up, and it's going to just make everybody go, wait a second, this Trump guy that I may have not liked so much, he's just like, wait a second. So I think it's a brilliant move, and I don't think what we're watching is something that's not part of the plan as well. I imagine that this has been in the works for quite a while in some way, one shape or form. Any insight in that?
Well, yeah, the people that came out so hard against Trump, I think for the most part did so as part of that consensus consciousness I was talking about earlier. They were told by media and their favorite celebrities and musicians and whatnot that he was a bad guy, so that's as far as they took it. Bad guy. Well, now they're starting to see this sea change around the world, and they're starting to notice that their lives are a lot more difficult than they used to be. And I think it's just going to be a really easy transition back to something that makes a little more sense. So yeah, I think as far as the consensus folks, this can only feed the enthusiasm on that side.
Right. And if SG does know of certain women, like I'd love to hear about women that are standing up and that are not just, I mean, obviously we know about Nurse Aaron and there's many women, but I mean, as far as politically,
yeah,
at
like,
that level.
well, Le Pen would be one.
Oh, okay,
Now,
okay,
this
thank
was
you,
several,
thank you.
several. She's been defeated, what, 3 times now in this whole circus?
Oh, right.
And then there's I can't remember the woman who is currently in power in Italy. Drawing a blank, but SG, you're so good with names.
Well, if I'm not mistaken, it's still Giorgia Meloni, is it not?
That's right.
And Marine Le Pen is another great example, right, of a We the People candidate that has run for office and had her, quite frankly, had victory stolen from her, at least in one instance, I believe in a couple of instances, and yet is continuing the good fight. And I think that speaks to the duality of the energy, right, masculine and feminine in the world, and how all We the People across all lines are realizing that we need each other.
Absolutely.
The culture war, while it's interesting and certainly makes for an intellectual discussion, I think at the end of the day, it's counterproductive and counterintuitive to everything that's good about humanity as far as the long term, as far as our long-term evolution and our long-term implication of existence here in the world. And we have to acknowledge that the culture war, we can have at a social level, we can have these discussions and design our social spheres the way we would like them to be, but there are certain baseline understandings that we can't deviate from. Men and women's sports, for example, is insane, and both sides understand this. No men like it, no women like it. The cross bathroom issue with, and especially in school systems, right? This is another thing that both sides, men and women, they don't appreciate this, and that regardless of sexual orientation. Some of the most fervently outspoken opponents of we'll say transition friendly bathrooms, this idea where you can send the opposite biological gender into a bathroom, have been the gay community. They very much are deeply opposed to this because it is offensive to all of the work that they put in to achieve an equal status, amongst their peers, an equal status amongst their colleagues at work, things of this nature, right? It demeans the work that they've put in. It demeans the journey that the gay community has been on in the last 50 years here in the United States, and even longer in other areas around the rest of the world. And so they're deeply opposed to the idea that we can wage such insanity at the biologic culture level space, and actually look one another in the eye and approve of it to some degree. So seeing the step up has to occur at all levels, right? Some of the most powerful opponents of the policies of school boards in this process have been women. We saw Bonds for the Win launched by a lady named Mickey Clan, a couple of years ago, which became a wildfire, a voracious consumer of the school board, the corruption that was existing at the school board level. It terrified the school boards around the country, so much so that I believe it was Business Insider ran a hit piece about this individual, and the work that she was doing and the work that she was putting together, accused her of terrorizing school boards, right? Weaponizing parents, because they always like to project and tell us what they're actually doing. So in this process, we're seeing everyone stand up. We're seeing the activation of the masculine, the feminine, across all different ideologies, orientations, division lines, schools of thought, because there are baseline understandings of what it means to be human that we all have to agree on. God didn't get our biology wrong. We can choose to project and behave in our biology however we would like to, and certainly we have the right to do with our own body that which we wish to once we are of age. Right. And you can make the case that maybe that's a little bit older than 18, but that's another discussion for another day. But at the end of the day, there are certain components that are sort of inarguable because on their face, the premise is that we live in a faltered universe. And if that is the case, then all of this entire journey is for naught, and we might as well let the evil ones win.
I mean, couldn't we just sort of amicably solve this whole transgender sports issue? I mean, the amount of money that Anheuser-Busch lost with the Bud Light debacle could have funded the establishment of all kinds of different transgender leagues. Yeah, and then they'd have their own league in which to compete with each other. And of course, I'm being a little facetious here. That's not the point. But right. I think an attempt at providing them with that would reveal the real point and get it right out in the
and on that topic, I have nieces, and we were out to dinner last week, and I tried to let them know while we're on this topic, about a transgender agenda, and and how it's affecting children, and they don't see it. And so one of my nieces, I ended up letting her know that there is a former Navy SEAL that was that is a man that became a woman that's now a man, publicly again. And I sent that video. I've not heard back from my niece on that topic, but and then we hear much of Hollywood is inverted, born one way and then presented the other. There's different, I'm not going to throw out any names right now, but it is. And Scott has said to me, and this is where I learned about it, that towards the end of civilizations is a rise.
Empire, there's a rise in transgenders, the instance of transgenders. This is, most notably with the Roman, the fall of the Roman Empire, but I think Babylon, there's been, I don't know, it's documented.
It goes hand in hand with, taking, the removal of our creator out and the insertion of the satanic agenda in, and we see it across all forms of entertainment. And so, I bring this up that, maybe my niece one day will understand what, why I'm doing what I'm doing. It's when I started hearing about the trafficking of children and this agenda. And if someone wants to do that later in their life, more power to them, whatever they want to do. But when they're infiltrating the minds of children, I can't do anything but speak on it. And I believe that you're in the same boat as I am, but please go ahead.
Well, I'm just, when freedom is paramount for everyone, and in defending freedom, you have to defend the freedoms that you don't like too. Mm-hmm. And we get into that sticky area with this particular subject because, it is having an adverse effect on young people and an adverse effect on beer companies. And I kid, but you have to think about these things.
Yeah.
And it's not a political solution. It's a cultural solution. And it's when we force these ideas into the shadows that they gain traction. Communism is a great example of that. But when they're out in the open, people pretty much discuss them and figure out that they're pretty bad ideas, and they don't get any traction.
Right.
And right now we're being steered by this ESG agenda, and this is steered by the WEF, and it's not authentic. It's not organic. People didn't just suddenly decide to start switching their genders and so on. I think atrazine in the water helped. I think microplastics. I think a myriad of marketing campaigns. Look at entertainment for children these days.
Well, 1 in 4 children in high school, I just heard, that is identifying as something other than straight, and that's a statistic that is not been, that's not natural, that's been created.
Well, it has been created, but here's the interesting part. When you're young and impressionable, you want to fit in, and I've talked to young kids that say it's not fashionable to be straight, so they just tell people that they're bi or that they're something else in order to fit in. So that's kind of where we're at. And my point is that was a marketing effort. That was a corporate campaign to alter our culture, and it was highly successful. These people know what they're doing, but I think we're at that point where it's starting to
backfire a little bit
in a big way.
Yeah. So, SG,
I think I would agree with that, gentlemen. And you raise a really, really good point. When we talk about freedom, we talk about self-expression, we talk about the right to choose, we talk about the right to self-direct, self-determine what sovereignty means, which has been the basis of our conversation for a lot of our discussion today. We have to acknowledge that if someone of consenting age in the area that they live with no criminal record and they've not done harm to another, right, and they're not forcing things onto another, especially at the juvenile level, we have to acknowledge that they're free to do a lot of things. They can do, what we would find galling things, right? As long as they don't do that, forcing it upon someone else, causing harm to someone else, and that's where the stickiness in the discussion comes. But you point out a very good component of this, which the community at large, especially in the transitory community, they're not fully grasping. They're not understanding that agenda. Bankrolled at the academic level in a big way by big pharma stands to directly benefit pharmaceutical companies, because you will need to be on drugs for the rest of your life if you choose to go through some sort of an affirmation or transition surgery. So who really benefits here? You will be forced to have health insurance because you'll never be able to make enough money to pay for all of the drugs that you'll need for the rest of your life. So they've locked you into two enormous expenses right out of the gate. And they've done so by weaponizing your emotions, our emotions, against us, and confusing us at a pre-adolescent and adolescent level. And that's why they target those communities specifically. Thinking, rational, reasonable adults can reason out to themselves the fallacy in some of this. We see the trans community in the over 25 space, the proportion of that community go way, way down, relevant to the overall number of the population of that age band, right? That population group. In other words, by 25, 26, 27 years old, individuals have figured out a lot about how they think, feel, and believe here in the world. And history teaches us, and even we're seeing it right now laid out in real time through the behavior of different population groups, teaching us that this idea, by and large, does not go over for a long time in human history. It sort of doesn't serve the overall longevity of the species. It's a very fascinating and intellectual discussion. It does show up around the fall of empires in a number of different ways, because when you destabilize society at their biological understanding level, then you have destabilized the human being to the point that they're not going to be able to form a cohesive resistance to any sort of external force. And we, of course, know that that is the purpose of this. The George Soros DAs that allow these different rallies to occur, for example, are doing so on purpose. They're paid to. The individuals that promote these agendas on BBC, that promote these agendas on ABC, the Disney company, the different major telecom companies, right? The woke agendas coming out in retail and in finance, all of it's financed by hedge funds. All of it's paid for by the same individuals at the top of society that own the pharmaceutical companies that are going to benefit from the lifetime of drug addiction that one signs up for whenever they choose to participate in a transition process. So it is a sticky situation, because on the one hand, we want to respect their right to choose as free thinking, free consenting adults when they're causing no harm and they're not forcing it onto other age bands, other individuals, certainly in the juvenile space. On the other hand, we have to acknowledge that the agenda itself is not primarily organic, that the agenda itself is sort of the culmination of 40 years of atrazine, like you said, in the water supply, the assault of masculinity, the assault on the nuclear family. And the assault on masculinity has not just been to feminize men, but has been to toxically masculate men in some regards, to cause it to be taboo to be masculine, right? That's another angle of this assault. So we have to remember that there has to be a balance of reason and logic. Adults are typically much more capable of that than the pre-adolescent and adolescent community. And that's why they have essentially installed this agenda within the academic institutions of not only the United States, but most of the developed Western world.
Very well said.
Thank you.
And I've got to ask you this question. I've asked it a couple of times in the past, but we're watching all these enormously successful multi-billion-dollar companies commit financial suicide in the pursuit of higher ESG scores, and I have to ask myself why. Done so many times. Could it be that they know that their funding is no longer going to be coming from the consumer, but in this new model of the world, of society, of culture, perhaps they're funded in some other way? I mean, it's pretty sinister, but what do you think?
Oh, I think what you're talking about is simply the realization of the shadow model that has existed in the background for a very long time. Nearly all of the critical infrastructure of the United States, for example, is controlled by 3 separate hedge funds. Nearly all of the commerce market in the United States is controlled by 2 hedge funds. When we look at where the different feeler arms of corporate society are going, they all arrive at the same beast at the very top, except now we're seeing the beast simply publicly proclaim their intention to force ESG. Larry Fink of BlackRock not that long ago coming out and saying, yeah, sometimes we have to force the change. Companies don't want to do it. But at the end of the day, we're the largest investor and they have to do what we say because they have a fiduciary responsibility under all of the laws, right? And so we then are shown in a statement like that how the incestuous relationship between the mega billionaire assets, between the mega elite hedge funds, the extremely large transnational finance, and that of government levers of power, how those how that incestuous relationship dovetails to enable essentially what amounts to social and societal engineering. And so these companies acting lock, stock, and barrel in lockstep with their controllers at the top, this has been occurring for a very long time, right? But it's been done so in a very deliberate, very methodical, very slow boil the frog kind of way. Now we've thrown the gas stove all of the way to the high position, and we're just letting the pot do whatever it will. And people are realizing that the only way to truly make some sort of a difference is to the greatest extent possible is to cut off interaction with these groups entirely, to not fund them, to not give them the work of our hands and the sweat of our brow, right? To direct those dollars in an economic warfare capacity, again, to the greatest extent possible, away from this system. We're not currently able to disconnect from it in entirety. We still need fuel. We still have to have heat, things of this nature, but we don't necessarily have to buy children's clothes from Target, right? We don't have to go out and spend money at Kohl's. We don't have to buy appliances from Walmart. There are other options. There are places where we can go to intersect with society, certainly at the locally owned business level, the community level, maybe even the interstate commerce patriot based level, right? There are some companies out there that specialize in those types of things, but we are beginning to see options come into the alternative economy. And that, in my belief, is the only way forward from we the people's standpoint to stop things like the social engineering, the agendas that are being pushed in academia and corporations, and what amounts to the realization into the foreground of the shadow power that has always been.
But wouldn't it highlight that we are really at that end game stage? I mean, that would be hybrid. That would be the arrest of conventional commerce and some sort of hybrid slavery that's far more transparent than the hybrid slavery we're currently in. And you have this huge concentration, as you mentioned, with these hedge funds. You have well, there's just so much control on so many different levels. The consumer voice is getting snuffed right out. This is sort of the last stand for the consumer to have any influence, and I'm pleased to see that it's having the impact it's having. That doesn't mean that it's necessarily going to work. I'm confident it will, but I mean, what do you think?
I think from the consumer standpoint, what really is the true goal here is the change in attitude, the change in understanding of how we interface with the economic system. The understanding that it's not safe and it's not in our best interest to allow private entities that can be controlled for their own interests by their own interests to have massive amounts of control over critical national infrastructure, for example, commerce, railway lines, power, things of this nature, right? Electric cooperatives, three major cooperatives that are controlled by boards. Several of those boards having foreign influence and foreign seats, right, on those boards, control the entirety of the U.S. power grid. So we have a component portion of our society, a very vulnerable area, right, that is controlled partly by interests that are here in the United States, partly by interests that are abroad. And those that are here in the United States are controlled by foreign money. So really, it's all abroad. At the end of the day, we have to come back and remember that attitudinally, we cannot put into place a commerce system that is so centralized. Decentralization, I think, really is the word that will be on everyone's lips as we go forward. How do we decentralize society, allow for the greatest expression of free trade, free thinking, free commerce, a free existence, right? The actualization of sovereignty while also respecting the social compacts that we have. And we form those social compacts through what we would call duly passed laws, right? And those laws have to be, again, duly passed by those who are truly elected, which is a situation we've not had here in the United States in at least 50 years. So going forward, I think it really is going to be, what does the locally fueled economy look like? How does it intersect with the state level economy? How does the state level economy intersect with the interstate action of commerce? How does that intersect with international exchange and trade, while preserving the right to privacy, the right to security, and the right to sovereignty of both the consumer and the service provider or the inventor, right? We have to acknowledge that inventor primacy is one of those things that has also been destroyed. Very good men like Tesla and many others have been ruined and in some cases murdered by this deep state to prevent the technology, to prevent the economic change that would come from their inventions and the things that they have brought to the fold. So that is another thing that's going to drive essentially what amounts to a reimagining of commerce around the world. it's going to be very, very exciting, but we have to put sovereignty, we have to put privacy, and we have to put self-respect and dignity with some sort of a moral basis, even if it's a limited moral basis, at the forefront, or we're not going to create a system that's really any better.
I fully agree, and I think decentralization is key. I'm just wondering, if we reduce the size of the federal government enough, could we put the whole thing in one building? Because I think we should.
Technically, we only have
in the world right now, but maybe we can shrink it down to one building. I don't know.
I mean, it is technically true that we only have 3 limited branches of government and a United States post office. So at the end of the day, I think we could get the federal government and the control, the levers of power of the federal government certainly constrained from where they are now. I don't think that the federal government needs a law enforcement arm, but that's my own personal opinion. Constitutionally, how we reform things and how we change things, especially in our bureaucracy going forward, that's going to be, I think, a topic of great American debate. But I'm very excited to see what the next, 15 to 20 years holds. We get through this period, we begin to obliterate the deep state in lawful fashion. We eventually arrive at a point where we have done that job. And so then from that point, the job is revisioning the earth, right? To reimagine our institutions, to bring them more closely in alignment with their original visions and founders, I think, which we've been out of sync with certainly since the US Civil War, I believe even before that. And to help export that model, if we could be so arrogant here as Americans for a moment, to help export that model in a true fashion, not a militarized forced submission fashion, to the rest of the world, so that we can all have what amounts to a free thinking, free trade, fair system based on some social compacts and some duly agreed upon laws of constraint and operation, right? That will allow for the creation of the type of world we all wish to see.
Beautifully
Again,
said.
well said. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's probably a good note to wrap up on, actually.
I think so. And I think our viewers will agree with, whenever we have him on the show, I just feel a step higher in my intelligence. I don't know. I just feel so much more educated and better about what's going on in the world. It's always a treat and a pleasure to have you on. And could you let people know where to find you, and any last words? And before you do, I just want to let our viewers know that we're very thankful for all of your help and donations to our show. It keeps Scott and I going. And we're also on Twitter. We'll have all our links below: Telegram, Rumble, etc. But SG, please wrap it up for us, if you'd be so kind.
Well, certainly. I can be found in 3 places now online. I've been on Truth Social and Rumble for a while. I'm on Truth at RealSG Anon with a red check mark, and I'm on Rumble at rumble.com/user/QNewsPatriot. I'm not on Rumble by SG Anon. And I'm now on Twitter at the handle the Q News Patriot, THE News Patriot, with a blue check mark. And with regards to closing remarks, I think I would just reiterate maybe what I was saying a moment ago. We have to acknowledge that the change process that's occurring here is not over when we achieve the second Trump presidency, right? We take the war to a next level at that point. And then once we have finally concluded with the evisceration and obliteration of the deep state control complex around the world, then we have a very big job ahead of us. We have to bring about what our Creator wishes us to see here in the world, wishes to see made in this world in the way that it was supposed to be. We have to purify our environment. We have to care for the flora and the fauna again, but we also have to acknowledge that the flora and the fauna also care for us. So there are important things, I think, that we're going to be doing. There's important discussions we're going to be having as humanity. There's important discussions and reconstructions that we're going to be participating in, especially as it pertains to governmental control, this idea of decentralized sovereignty, how we exercise true self-determination in an environment where the human being is not fettered, right, is not constrained, governed by some sort of restrictor plate model. Once we purge things like poisons out of our genome, for example, what will occur to our generations going forward? We're going to be designing a world that is really going to be served in some regards by a progeny that we will leave here that will be much more capable than we ever were, simply because of their exposure, or lack thereof, I should say, to things that are antithetical to life and that corrupt and damage their DNA and their health. So this is a tall task. This is a tall order, and we need spiritual guidance. I think that's one of the reasons that this war has been a spiritual war almost more than anything else, right? It is a literal war for consciousness. It's a war for the minds and hearts of man. It's a war for the understanding of who we really are spiritually. And we have to reclaim that. We have to step back into that confidence, step back into that personal power as we, the people, right down to our community level, levels of influence, or we're not going to be able to build the world that we need to build for the type of human civilization and human existence that we are going to create going forward.
Agreed. We get rid of some bad actors, and we'll be pursuing evolution rather than being pursued as something to be controlled. So I like the picture you painted, and thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Thank you, gentlemen. I look forward to coming back. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. We'll be in touch very soon. Thank you. And thank you, everybody, for watching TruthStream. Cheers.